From high atop my mountaintop here in Mount Manitoba, it's the Hall of Fame show, and it's season 3, episode 29. And if you're thinking, wait a minute, Evan Nolan's not here, that's okay. I didn't just get one replacement, I got two. I've got Chicago, another Chicagoan. Is that what you call it? I don't know. Yes? Okay. Jack Silverstein, read Jack. You can follow him, and you should. And I've also got Paul Lawrence. Paul, good to see you again. And both of you have been on previous committee shows, and thank you both for stepping in. This is kind of like when Fleetwood Mac, when Lindsey Buckingham sort of left for a bit, and they replaced him with two people. I'm just trying to make Evan feel better. I don't know.
I mean, that depends who replaced Lindsey Buckingham.
I don't know.
I need the context here, Kirk, before I can tell you how Evan's going to
feel. So, gentlemen, we got a pretty big day. This was the first time, I think, ever that we've now pared down from semis to finalists in the Pro Football Hall of Fame seniors pool. I mean, well, it's the first time we've known about it. So I think we should just get right into that, because that's really the main event. And let's just say who got in first before we sort of like go any further, and then we can sort of like have our visceral reactions from it. So the 12 who were selected: quarterback Ken Anderson, linebacker Maxie Vaughn, linebacker Randy Gradisher, another linebacker Chuck Howley, Cecil Esbell, tailback, defensive back, halfback, jack of all trades back in those days. Defensive and defensive tackle Joe Klecko, offensive lineman Bob Kuchenberg, cornerback Eddie Metter, cornerback Ken Riley, wide receiver Sterling Sharp, and cornerback Everson Walls. They are the people who've gotten in or who have advanced. And I think the first thing that we want to look at is who are, like, I know Jack already, because you're most happy about being with Sterling Sharp.
Weird.
And,
Weird.
Well, yes, as a Bears
fan, I feel like juice for Jesus with this one. Just
no, but it's
be out there with the van.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with the inappropriate material right off the top, so everybody, just be ready.
And so, Paul, but same question, because I already knew Jack's answer on this, who he's most excited about. But who are you most excited about to see advance?
The guy right over here.
Yeah, we know that. We know that too. We know both of these. His makes sense. Mine's.
No, yours makes sense in terms of being a football fan, not necessarily a homer.
Mine makes sense because that's the one that feels the most egregious to me personally, because I believe in peaks, dominance, transcendence. I also think that it lends me a little bit of credibility for the Bears stuff that I talk about if I'm willing to put my my Bears card on the line for a Packer. And of all the stuff I've written, I think the Sterling Sharp one is probably the one where I've been most definitive about making a statement. Mm-hmm. Whereas a lot of guys, I feel like, let's talk about it, let's be calm, and let's lay it all out and start the thing going. Sterling Sharp, there's no thing to get started. He's just
okay. So here's a question then for you, because you write for a lot of publications in Chicago sports. Do you get hatred from the Chicago fan base, or like people saying like, "What the hell are you doing?"
No, not at all. I didn't know if that was going to be the case when I dropped the first one, which was in 18 or 19, called "A Bears Fan Makes the Case for Sterling Sharp." Mm-hmm. But people have been cool. I mean, because one of the interesting things about football is that you really do see certain players a lot over the course of 5, 6, 7, 8 years, twice a year. We were seeing all these NFC Central teams. So we saw Brett Favre twice a year. We saw Barry Sanders twice a year. We saw Randy twice a year. We saw Dante twice a year. Mm-hmm. We saw, obviously, Rodgers. We saw Sterling Sharp twice a year. And for a bit there, we saw the beginning of the Bucs run as well, because they didn't go to the 8 divisions until 2002. the year they won it. So we got that whole run up as well. Where it was like, oh, the Bucks are good now. Sterling was just majestic. I mean, he was just otherworldly. He was someone, and I'm not, a lot of people have brought this up in our crew. He was someone who, 5-10 years later, he would have been in already because people wouldn't have cared as much about the short careers. So now you have obviously TD go in. I thought Kurt Warner should have been a senior guy, whatever. So you got, Kurt Warner had a longer career, but he only really had 5 seasons of note, that put him in the Hall. It's really just 5 years. TD has 4 years of note. So Sterling Sharp having 7 and also not missing a game his entire career. And the only game he missed was the 94 playoff game, or 2 games. They won and then they lost. So he was a year away from being in a Super Bowl. He was a year away from 2 years. Well, maybe you put him on the 95 Packers. Maybe they win that Super Bowl over your Cowboys, Paul. I mean, win the NFC title game. And you know what I'm saying? So he was really so close to walking into Canton. And I think to me, that's the difference between a lot of these guys is that for whatever reason, justified or not, there's something was missing. We talked a lot about Gradishar, 10 seasons, although, 7 Pro Bowl seasons, 5 All-Pro seasons out of 10, 4 seasons where he was receiving Defensive Player of the Year votes. Or you look at Chuck Howley with his 5 straight All-Pros and his back-to-back Super Bowl performances, each of them, pretty impressive. Something, though, is missing from someone's case where they went through an entire career, even at 10 years. The only thing that was missing from Sterling Sharp's case was not having the world's flukiest neck injury.
Mm-hmm. So Chuck Howley, just to our Cowboys fan here, that's another one that I'm personally very, very happy about. I've been high on Chuck for a long time. It feels like there's a lot of momentum behind him, and a lot behind Randy Gradishar. I could be mistaken on that, but that's just sort of what my spidey sense is tingling. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think your take on that is pretty good, Kirk. I mean, it seems like Gradishar is one of these guys that, every few years you see, a little more bubbling in social media. You sort of see a little bit of push. And he's a guy that has been close before, like Chuck Howley has. We know they've been up and considered many, many years by the committee. And of course, Gradishar was a finalist for the Centennial class and didn't get elected. So, yeah, he certainly has his advocates. I think maybe, over the years, the two of them maybe offset one another. Maybe the voters were kind of struggling between two guys. Their careers didn't really overlap, but the position they played and their different career, different accomplishments. But I wonder over the years whether that's hurt. We know in the past there's been candidates, right, that have been hurt because there was somebody else on the ballot that would split votes, whether it's by position or team. But my sense of it is, and frankly, I really don't think Chuck Howley's going to get in this year. I really think it's Gradishar's year, and I would be surprised if out of the 3 finalists that this committee is going to pick next month, that they do pick 2 linebackers from the 70s, although Gradishar played in the 80s. We didn't. It's just good to see that continue. And, as we look forward, right, we have 3 slots this year. We have 3 slots of each of the next 2 years. And you really look at a list of 12 like this, and you can say, those 9 are probably going to come from here. And that in itself, for me, is a huge improvement where we were for many years picking only 1 senior. And then we went to 2 seniors for about a decade, right? And then back to 1. So I'm almost more excited about the fact that we're going to get 9 in, which for me means I don't see how Howley misses out on that opportunity. And I would be fully supportive and excited if a guy like Randy Gradishar get in, because clearly he's deserving, has the supporters, and I wouldn't want to see that taken away or be a struggle. I hope they don't play one against another and neither one of them get in. That would be fortunate. But Kurt, I think your impression is pretty right. I see him as the leading. There is 3 slots, so you got a little room there. And I think he's clearly, in my mind, the number 1 leading odds maker, if you want to put money on it. One of the 3 is going to be Randy Gradishar.
We've also got not for the first time, Cincinnati's represented with 2 very big names, and Ken Anderson, Ken Riley, 2 players that we both well, all of us have sort of discussed in great detail. And I think even though we don't really have a Bengals fan in our group, I know that we've all sort of like stressed in our own unique way that Cincinnati is very much underrepresented in the Hall. Does putting two through possibly cancel each other out? I don't know. Like I'm just, or what's like, who would, if you were one of the, who would you pick, or who would you push for more if you were a Bengals fan, Anderson or Riley? And I put that to both of you.
If I were a Bengals fan,
yes,
I don't have a read. I actually my one Bengals friend is actually a little bit younger than me, so he would have missed that era completely.
Mhm.
I would, I would venture to say maybe Anderson, but the thing I think about with Riley is the way that, again, this is something our group talks about, the Riley versus Parrish question. And is Riley liked more because he was on the team his entire career? So in that respect, projecting, if I were a Bengals fan, maybe Riley is that fan favorite who I would push. I don't think they cancel each other out necessarily. When we did our vote and approached it with a lot of information, knowledge, wisdom, patience, reason, open-mindedness, and I thought we had a great list. And we've seen how different the 12 is compared to our 9.
Mhm.
But it didn't impact that. The linebacker split didn't impact that. We had Gradishar and Howley in. We had Anderson in the first year, and I think Riley in the third. So, the degree to which something that we're doing matches what is happening in the room with the actual committee, the fact that we do come from so many teams and so many cities and a little bit of an age range, there are a lot of opinions and a lot of perspectives. So when we came up with that, it wasn't an issue. I don't think it is going to be an issue. But I have a question. A few years ago, I did a Hall of Fame ballot for the first time. I took all of the nominees and then I pared it down and I wrote an article that was like, this is my top, I think I did like top 40, like as a first cut. And then I did 25, 15, 10 in my class. And one of the ways that I made these determinations was there were certain guys who I was like, okay, because of the ballot, I know you're not getting in this year. I know you're not getting in this year. And I would be more interested to advance players who are at the end of their modern era eligibility to say, like, I don't think you're going in, but I would like another round of having conversations about you. I mean, it was just me writing it. So I wasn't having conversations with anybody, but projecting it, I was like, boy, I would love to, if I were on a committee, I would love to see another conversation about Carl Mecklenburg, where we can like breathe for a bit and talk about him for another, 2 weeks. Wilbur Marshall was one of the guys on that list. I think it was 2009. It was Sterling Sharp's last year of modern era eligibility. Point being, when I look at this list and I see 4 linebackers here, and we've got, it's only 3 people in a class. It's only 9 for 3 years. 4 linebackers out of 9 would seem like a lot. And certainly you're not going to get 4. You're not going to get 3 linebackers as the only ones going in. So Paul, my question is that an instinct that voters would follow or that would be brought up where they go like, okay, we know Gradishar and Howley are sort of ahead of the pack, but we'd like to use this as an opportunity to also talk about Novus and Bond because we'll have all these linebackers here and we can kind of maybe sort out how we feel rather than if you only had one of them or 2 of them, they're a little bit more in a silo. You're not maybe comparing as many stats. It's just natural when you have 4 linebackers to say, let's group them all together. Let's talk about them all together and maybe come up with a pecking order. And the flip side that stands out is we had all those great offensive tackles and from the 25 and none of them are in, right? Because it's just Kuchenberg.
Just Kuchenberg, yeah. He's the only one.
Excuse me. So is that something that voters do where they kind of throughout the conversation or maybe even just to themselves say like, I'd like to talk about a pack of a position and use this extra round to do this, because we're only putting 3 in anyways. So if you're not going to be in the 3, what really difference does it make if you're in the 25 or the 12?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, a dilemma, I guess, Jack. And we don't know a lot, right? We don't get an inside view. Historically, right, for many years, there was a 9-member committee, a rotation of 5 of them. 5 people would sit in a meeting and make these choices. Now that's changed now. We have a 12-member committee. All 12 will actually participate. So that's much larger diversity. If they follow the modern candidate process, when the committee looks at the 15 finalists, each one of those is presented. They're discussed individually, right? They go through all 15, right? Then they have sort of, I guess, an open forum, and then they start doing vote down from 15 to 10 to 5, et cetera. And if I can only imagine, the Hall really is trying to mirror these processes now where they never used to, the senior, coaches, contributors, and the modern. So I can only envision this process will be there's 12 members in the room, there's 12 candidates. They're all going to be asked to present one of them. But you're right, when they see that collectively after all 12 have been presented, that discussion could really go the way you're talking about. Is somebody could speak up and say, listen, let's talk about all these linebackers. How do people feel about them? How would people rank them? How would you separate? Because they're all going to be pondering that, okay, we have to vote down, whoever they do, maybe they go from 12 to 6 or 8, right? And down to 3, or it may take several rounds. But at any rate, I think you're onto something. I mean, that would be a logical way. If I was a voter in that room and I heard all 12 and there were 4 linebackers, yeah, I might have a tendency to say, okay, I think we're all thinking the same thing. We've got 4 guys from the same position whose careers actually overlap a little bit or are close. To think, look at how do people feel about the differences here and see how that plays out. But I do think, given what I know about the process and the players like Howley and Gradishar, who have been repeatedly in that committee, different group of committee, different mix every year,
I agree.
that they are going to be a step above the other 2. And I really don't see, I mean, a log jam is a log jam. The voters deal with these all the time. Remember, the moderns had all the wide receivers, and we see that with different positions.
Again.
Yeah, and I think they're used to this log jam issue, and at some point, right, they need to step forward and say, okay, the only way to really get over this, because next year we'll be in the same boat if we don't deal with it, is to move forward. And I want to point out, looking at the affiliations of the 12 members who are on this committee will be in the room, there are 2 of them who quasi represent the Denver media market. There is not any, and there's one from Dallas, Rick Goslin. But I think the fact that you have 2 people in the room who are from the Denver market probably means you've got 2 strong advocates for Gradishar. You're going to have advocates because Rick Goslin is a strong supporter, I think, of Howley. But that might be one way in which they, 12 people in a room, like it's a jury, right? You can really influence people by making a hard push. I think that's another thing that Gradishar among the linebackers is going to benefit from. I don't think the other 2 linebackers besides Howley and Gradishar have that kind of push behind them. And by the way, there's nobody from the Cincinnati and media market in that 12. And I have no idea if any of the others are really supportive of Riley or Anderson, or trying to sort out the same dilemma we are, right? Which of the 2?
So we can't discount the pushes. Look with Bryant Young. There were big pushes, external pushes and we all sort of looked at, and again, nothing against Bryant Young, but he, I think to us, jumped a lot of players in this Hall of Fame queue. But those pushes are huge, especially when you've only got a small group of people. And this is a lot smaller. Like they were able to do that with 48. This is only 12.
Last year, it became kind of clear, well in advance of the meeting in late August, that Cliff Branch was being pushed. And again, at that point, there were only 5 people in that room. He was somebody that had been considered in years past, but you're absolutely right. These can happen where in one given year, 1 or 2 of the voters in that room make a push, right? And that comes up in the room, they make the case, and we often see, 1, or in this case, we got 3 slots, maybe 1 or 2 really get pushed ahead. And the only one that you have to read the tea leaves, and it's not always a perfect science here, but I think Gradishar is the guy this year that we're going to see that for. But there's always surprises, and there's 3 slots, and I'm pretty certain that one of them may be a shocker to all of us. It could come from any of the other 11.
Well, let's talk about the shockers that we've already seen in the
Hmm.
12. No Roger Craig,
Mhm.
no Lester Hayes, and none of these tackles. And I would have
Larry
been,
Dilweg, like
and no Dilweg.
yeah, no, like being nominated in 2020 in that Centennial slate
Right.
class didn't do shit for a lot of people. Like
Right.
Yeah, Craig was one of them. Delweg is another one that, that's, in the last 2 years, right? The voters have tried to correct a little bit for the Centennial class because the two guys that were elected the last couple of years were actually, again, 2020 Centennial senior finalists. And we thought that kind of mindset would continue. But yes, Gradishar is in that group, but it was very surprising. I really thought Craig, not only did I think he was going to get in the 12, I really thought he had a serious shot at one of the 3 slots because of the role he fits, the decade he represents, if you want to call it that, the team he played for, and that he was a Centennial class finalist. I thought that would really carry a lot of weight, and he just obviously didn't make it through.
I thought he was going to sail into this round. And I guess I guess that's a bit hyperbolic and a bit mysterious because you're either in or you're not. So sail in, I don't know what that means. But I just thought, I think I just took it for granted that he would be in the 12. And I think for people who are paying attention to this and who are watching, who aren't just thinking about this group, maybe your guy is in the 12, but maybe your guy was left out and is in the 25. Maybe your guy didn't make the 25 at all. I think what's important to remember here is that the question of the queue is very much a question. As we saw with this 2020 group, it wasn't just these guys who were left out from 25 to 12. It was guys who were left out from the final 10 into this 25 who didn't make it. And that was a big surprise to all of us. So I think it's important to remember that you're really only looking at 3. And then it's really probably back to the drawing board. And that's why I'm wondering about these linebackers, because they might use this as an opportunity. I agree with you, Paul, that it looks like Gradishar, it's his year. It also looks like Howley's in. I'm watching Super Bowl 5 actually right here on YouTube. And Howley just had this running, just stabbing interception, running backwards away from the line of scrimmage to his left and then moving to his right. Just a lot of athleticism. I think sometimes it's very important and very influential for me when I see even just one certain clip or read one certain interview or like one certain article that just gives you that extra context that you might be missing. And I wonder if the voters use this opportunity to have these 4 guys who have, in some respects, similar cases, similar eras, similar challenges to their modern era candidacy. And I wonder if they use the Gradishar as a bar and Howley as a bar to say, all right, we know that these guys are in. How close are Novus and Bond? And if they're not close, maybe that's a wrap. And they talk about it here, and then you're not going to see them in the 12 next year, and maybe you're not going to see them afterwards. Or they feel like one of those 2 guys is ahead of the pack. Maybe you're going to see them both. And maybe if they do think all 4, maybe that would be where the surprise would come in. And maybe the class would be Gradishar, Howley, X. I mean, let's go Sterling Sharp. That sort of checks your boxes, Paul, when you were talking about decades. Now it's got a double position. It's got, 66%, if you want to say, if the class would be the same position. But you do have 3 teams. You do have 3 eras. And that would open the door for a linebacker in each of the next 2 years without it feeling stuffed. So I'm just wondering if and that's something that I'm thinking about and watching because it's difficult to handicap this. But I do wonder if they're going to use that as an opportunity to contextualize other guys. The fact that we only have 1 wide receiver suggests that Sterling Sharp is so far ahead that they'll move him in this year or next. And the other thing that kind of makes me hopeful about Roger Craig and White Shoes, who also didn't get in, is that they have their own lanes. So I feel like if you don't want to have a discussion about them this year, you could say like it's okay because they're next man up for their particular spot. And You could all of a sudden see them up in the 12 next year, or you could see Roger Craig go from 25 to 3. I think that's the other issue here, is that because we've never had this information before, and it's never been publicly formalized, you weren't able to kind of look at all these chess moves and try to figure out this guy, that guy. It was very much like one dude pops up or two dudes pop up, they're finalists, they're in or they're not, and that's kind of all you know.
There's one group that we really haven't we haven't really talked about at all. And that's the corners. We've got 3 corners. And I think we all believe that there could be 1 or 2 linebackers that are going to get in. One's going to get in. If none get in, that's going to be a shock, I think, to really everybody who's paying attention. But we've got 3 corners, and I don't feel that's one is Riley, who we talked about before, Everson Walls, and Eddie Metter. What's the pecking order if there is one?
So, yeah, it's an interesting group. Metter and Riley, we know, have been talked about before. And to various degrees, they both have longstanding kind of traditional support from their fan bases and other. I think Metter's a guy who kind of flies below the radar, I think, for a lot of fans. But when you start looking at his case and you start looking in and you hear people making a case for him, it's actually pretty strong. And he does have his supporters, but I think here we are with these 3 cornerbacks. You just pointed out the dilemma, right? You got Riley with, his 65, right? Career interceptions in the top 10 all time. That's his case right there. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
That's his case, right? There it is.
That's his case.
And then you got a guy like Everson Walls, who was a modern finalist. His last year eligibility is a modern. Kind of came out of nowhere, which can occasionally happen. The voters put these guys in to have a talk about him, which is fair enough. Never really thought he would pop up again though soon, but here he is. And a guy who has kind of a unique little profile of his own, right? 3-time All-Pro, 3-time leader of NFL interceptions. That's a rare career accomplishment. Played for the Cowboys, then jumped over to the Giants. Is on as a sidebar, he's on 2 of the most famous Sports Illustrated covers in history.
There you go.
The catch,
yeah,
and the Giants over the Bills when he's on that cover. He had a good game, but he wasn't the star of the game, but he's on the cover of the Sports Illustrated.
Yeah.
Anyone under 30 does not know what Sports Illustrated is. Luckily, I don't have any people who watch this stuff that are under 30.
So it's an interesting group of 3. And I think Riley has a little bit of a head lead here because he's been so talked about. And my sense with Ken Riley is there's a lot of pro and cons to his case. There you go. If anybody didn't know what Sports Illustrated was, there you go.
Called a magazine.
Yeah.
Paper? What's that?
Yeah. So here's my view on Riley, right? We talk about a lot, and there's a good debate there. But here's the bottom line for me. Put the guy in. Let's just get him in. He strikes me as one of these guys we talk about every year, and we're going to talk about every year, right? Let's just get him in and move on. That's my view of it.
Of the 12 finalists, just who's the one out of these 12 that surprised you the most? Just to get this far. I mean, they're all deserving. I think we can all agree on that. But there was one where there had to have been like one, and for me, I'll say it's Walls. I was a little surprised. Yeah.
Walls.
Yeah, he's one. Yeah, I think Cecil Isabel. Mm-hmm. I find that really surprising. They really didn't do much with what they call the super seniors, the 360 guys. Really weren't well represented in the semifinalists. A lot of criticism for that. Guys that we would expect, guys who again were in that 2020 Centennial Seniors class, were not there. And the 2 that were, right, the guy we talked about, Delwig and Isabel. And I think if you put odds for most people to say, well, if anybody of those super seniors is going to get in out of that list, and it's only a few of them, it would have been Delwig. And yet he's not. and Cecil Isabel. Now, what that means in terms of the process going forward, whether the voters are like, well, we need to deal with these pre-60s like a logjam, so to speak, and get one in because we get a lot of heat for we're really not, or whether he's just the guy who's representing that super senior
That
and
has
he's
to
gonna get talked
assume-
about and then get tossed aside and never get in. I mean, that's a possibility.
but that
he was
also has to
surprised.
assume that they think that there's a pre-1960 logjam. There's not a lot of evidence to state that there is, that they think that way.
Yeah, you're right. The voters certainly don't look at it that way because the semifinalist list doesn't clearly shows that they don't.
Well, let's
really
look at
worried
those
about it.
who
That
didn't get through.
maybe, but see, that maybe collectively is the way that we've been thinking about it. That collectively is probably the biggest surprise, because now we're at a point where in the 12 it's just Isbell, but even in the 25 we were talking about a lot of the names that we were most surprised were off were all those early guys, and they were guys from 2020 who we thought, yeah, they'll be in for sure.
Well, let's look at the ones who didn't make it. And again, it's a who's who. Mark Clayton, who we haven't talked about, but I don't think any of us really thought that he was going to advance. Roger Craig, Lavi Dilweg, Lester Hayes. I think we talked about that. I think
It's unfortunate.
it is, because like that I thought would have been probably the next corner in, but clearly that's not going to. Well, it still could be. Chris Hinton, not surprising. Joe Jacoby, I was surprised a little bit. White Shoes, I know that you're pretty big on him, Jack. I didn't see him getting any further than this, but I think it's pretty good that he actually got here. Mike Ken, George Kuntz, Jim Marshall, who, okay, it's so fitting that I have them next to each other alphabetically. Jim Marshall, Clay Matthews Jr. I hate saying this, and for Cleveland fans, guys, I'm sorry, but part of me is sort of happy that Clay Matthews didn't advance, because the irrational fan base on this man's career is, I just said it, irrational. It's a little bit off. And I would have as a Saints fan, I would have loved to have had him for 10 years, but Hall of Famer.
Oh, I'm not with it. I'm glad that we're moving on.
Yeah.
I was surprised at Clayton's inclusion.
Yes.
I wasn't necessarily surprised at Matthews. I was just there's just a lot of people who are way ahead of it.
I didn't check because I just didn't want to see it. I didn't want to see if there were some, and I'm sure there were, people who were upset that Modell's as a finalist and Matthews isn't. Maybe the two of you checked that. I chose.
I did not.
I'm sure that exists.
I'm sure it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
The guy that I really can't quite figure out is Joe Jacoby, because this guy was, I think, a 6 or 7 time modern finalist.
I don't think it was that many, but he was multi-time.
But it was multiple years, right? So he was in the
Kuchenberg was 8.
8, okay.
Right.
Yeah. Jacoby was, but yeah, no, that's a good point. Was Jacoby one of the 2020? I forget.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But he is a guy, and Kuchenberg is another one like similar to that.
I'm pulling it up right now. Jacoby was a semifinalist 05, 08, 14, 15, and then he was a senior finalist 16, 17, 18, which were his final. So his final 4 years of eligibility.
Okay.
Excuse me, his final 5 years of eligibility, he went semi, final.
Okay. So I mean, go ahead.
No, I don't know. So the theory is, from some of the voters, right? These guys that were in the room as moderns, they get talked about, they've had their chance, and he had multiple chances. And so there's often this debate about seniors, like give other guys like a Drew Pearson and Chuck Howley and others a shot in the room to be talked about. But I still find both him and Kuchenberg sort of an odd group because, they have been talked about. Their qualifications are pretty good. They sort of like fallen off the radar. Now, good to see them back on that list. But I don't really, I'm not dismissing either one of their cases. It's just kind of like, what's taking so long for either one of them? I can't quite figure it out.
Well, Jacoby, and this is something that Jeff and I were talking about Peanut Tillman. I can look at Peanut Tillman's case, and because I was here, I can say, you know what, he played at a Pro Bowl level 05, 06, 07, 08, 09, 10. And maybe he shouldn't have made it all those years, but he should have made it more than 0 of those years. He didn't make it until 11. And if you start adding some of those Pro Bowls to his case, you don't change him, but his case is different. And maybe that's the case with Joe Jacoby. I can't look at him. It's very hard as, someone who was so young at the start of his career, and then it being an offensive lineman, it's difficult to watch and know, oh yeah, these are the seasons where he belonged in the Pro Bowl. But certainly that low number of Pro Bowls has got to be what was that delay. The fact that he was, that steady of a starter on 3 different Super Bowl champions, and on Super Bowl champions that are unique in that they were in that relatively contained period, but with 3 different quarterbacks.
And 2 of them were mediocre.
They all did their thing though in those years.
But,
I mean,
they won a Super Bowl.
They won
Sure.
but I mean, like Rippon, I mean, in that gorgeous, incredible age of QBs, there's like 9 QBs who played in '91 who are in the Hall of Fame, and Rippon was second team All Pro. Doug Williams, I mean,
it was a different era.
And Theismann was MVP the year after.
It also was a different era. I mean, like, you're not winning a Super Bowl without a top 10 quarterback. Then you could.
Well, but that's what makes that offensive line. That's what makes the Hogs so important. And so then when you look at Jacoby, it's like, yeah, maybe he should have had some more Pro Bowls. Maybe that's what's holding him back. But that essence, you can look at him and say, this guy achieved in a big way. And was he ever on that most dominant? I mean, maybe for a short period. I think he did have one of those. I've seen some lists of like offensive line, lineman of the year. Maybe he did have one of those. He reminds me, and I've mentioned this to you guys, he kind of reminds me of Craig. I feel like the difference between Jacoby and Craig is stats. The availability of statistics at the running back position compared to O-tackle. But otherwise, never quite, they weren't dominant. They were never quite, even in their best seasons, you would never been like, yeah, that's the best of the best. But that contribution to a championship team, 3 rings. And I noted the other week, you think of the 80s Niners, you definitively think offense first. And they have more defensive Hall of Famers than offensive Hall of Famers.
Yeah, and their number 3 guy, when you think of that, is Craig.
Right. That would be the one who would make it even.
Yeah, so I mean, when you have the 3 big guns in Buffalo who didn't win any.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Buffalo.
But anyway, so the other 2 were Stanley Morgan, Otis Taylor. We'll just gloss over the coach contributor finalists. I think some of them are pretty interesting. Roone Arledge, who I think definitely has a strong case, but it's going to be tough because he's got we talk about cues. Don Coryell has been this coaching cue forever, it feels like. Mike Holmgren, who Evan believes that Holmgren's going to surpass Coryell in terms of the cue.
And jumping.
Yeah.
Oh boy. I mean, that's another guy where you kind of felt, and I felt the same way about Denny Green, quite frankly. But that's another guy where you sort of felt as an opponent, I can like feel your impact. Sometimes you look at a coach and you don't really know, you can't feel like what it is they're doing. And then you've got innovators where like to the T what they're doing. It doesn't always mean championships. I often find that the guys who are most innovative, and it feels like this happens in the NBA a lot as well, the guys who really like push the pace of play and push the style of the game, they change the game, but they don't win championships. That's kind of how I look at like Coryell, Doug Moe, D'Antoni, Don Nelson, Mike Martz. Mike Martz won as an OC, but not as a head coach.
Yeah, no, it's very good.
Let me ask you this: Coryell.
Yeah.
Does he get credit? See, he's like a good coach and a great contributor. Does he get, now that this category is merged, does he get kind of looked at more holistically, do you think, Paul, by voters or Kirk?
Yeah, no, I think there's no doubt in it. And when that change was made, there were comments by folks who were sort of inside knowledge on the Hall that he would benefit because, the drawback for his case has always been, his win-loss record as a head coach is not very impressive and his playoff success is limited. But he was an innovator,
Right.
which you could equate to being a contributor. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, months ago when the change was made to put the two categories together, it was pointed out that this helps his
Him
case
and
probably
Clark
more than
Shaughnessy
anybody.
and Shaughnessy would be the other.
He's the other one. So I think it does move him up because I think his case is sort of stalled for many, many years. And among the coaches, and I believe there's 6 out of 12 on here that are coaches, he's probably, along with Buddy Parker, who I think we know was second in the coaches category last year. Those two are going to kind of float up to the surface. But this is kind of unique, right? We haven't had a coach contributor category. And so it'll be interesting for the voters to sort out, right, 12 names who of different roles, coaching versus contributors, and how that sort of plays out. But Jack, you're absolutely right. He definitely benefits, whether it's this year or down the road. He definitely benefits from this change. There's no doubt about that.
Let me ask you guys another question, and it's something I think I know, but I want to ask it for viewers and listeners who are interested in the Hall but might not have a sense of all the wrinkles. When we talk about the coaching candidates, we're really only talking about their head coaching careers. And I'm wondering if, I look at like Mike Shanahan, and he was kind of a guy like personality wise, he sort of fit in with that Denver team. But at the time when they were winning the 2 titles, I didn't really feel strongly about him. I didn't feel strongly about like what is his impact. He didn't feel to me like Parcells on a lesser level like Holmgren. I always felt like I understood kind of what Denny Green was doing. I always rocked with Denny Green, not because of they are who we thought they were thing, but I just felt strongly about him as a fan. Kind of watching, you felt like you could feel his imprint. I didn't feel that as much with Mike Shanahan until after they won the Super Bowl, the 2 Super Bowls, the year that TD got hurt, and they plugged in Olandis Gary, and he went for 1,000 yards. And then the next year, Gary got hurt, and they plugged in Mike Anderson, and he went for 1,000 yards. And I think it was maybe 2 years later, they brought in Reuben Drones, and he went for 1,000 yards. Now, this is what our friend and colleague, Tom, talks about with Tom Nalen. But it was as that progressed that I started to feel like, all that zone blocking that we heard about in the Super Bowl against Green Bay, where it was like, all right, that's interesting. They got these, lighter guys, and they're moving, they're making, setting up these cutback spaces for TD. All of a sudden, the way that system was able to repeat itself, and none of those guys were as talented as Terrell Davis, except for who else came after was McGahee, and he did well there too. So my question is, I start to then look at Shanahan like, all right, he won the 2 Super Bowls. He also had some level of innovation. I mean, I know it wasn't just him. I know they had their line coach. But yeah, there's something going on there. But then you also have him as offensive coordinator for one of the most explosive offenses I've ever seen and successful ones, the 94 Niners. And the question is, and I think I know the answer. The answer is no. But for listeners and viewers, do assistant coaching roles and success in an assistant role for a head coach, do those ever serve as a tiebreaker, a differentiator, the way that we talk about Adam Vinatieri, excellent, all-time great kicker, but it's those postseason kicks that put him over the top. Does that assistant work for Shanahan, for example? You start drawing like a full, picture of a coach and say, oh, well, Shanahan was doing this as an offensive assistant. It's the sort of thing that would make Bill Cowher look a little bit better if people were talking about what he was doing, as an assistant because of his impressive career, particularly on special teams. Is that something that comes into play? And if not, why not? Because for a game like football, it seems like there should be conversations about the totality of the career.
I think the short answer is not yet, only because there's such a backlog. When I'm looking at this, I think we have the same reaction when we're looking at the players and we're looking at the coaches / contributors, that it's really rough that only 3. So I don't think they're going to look at that as much as they should. Only because
Well, they're only going to pick one coach contributor, so
right. So
that makes it really, really.
It's got to be
tough.
something where, okay, like in the case of Shaughnessy, I think we all can make a very big case for Clark Shaughnessy, but he's not going to get in. He's just not, and it's not against this group. I don't see how.
And I really think the voters, when it comes to coaches, have really backed themselves into a corner. I mean, coaches is a really relatively new category. It didn't appear until 2020. And then when you look, you know, and no offense to either one of them, but, you know, Dick Vermeil, right, and you look at Bill Cowher. And so you've got guys that won one Super Bowl. And here we have Mike Shanahan, who won two. And I think at that very level, it's pretty basic, right? But at that very level, you look at that and say, well, why are guys with one Super Bowl in? And here's a guy, and Jack's right about the whole, how do you account for innovation? How do you account for leadership and all the other factors that go into being a head coach? But they've kind of walked themselves into a situation where they're opening themselves to fair criticism about this question of, well, you let guys in with one Super Bowl, and then you got Mike Shanahan with two. That's a hard question not to get around, and makes me think that over time, whether it's this year or not, I don't know, that he's going to be at that level where he's a serious contender. Mike Holmgren brings a lot of other attributes to the table, so that's a fair debate. But this whole thing about, again, I want to flog a dead horse here, but you know, if you're going to put guys in with one Super Bowl, what are you going to do with a guy who has two of them?
What are you going to do with George Seifert?
Well, has he even ever been considered in any capacity at all? I don't even think he's been on the radar at all.
No,
George Seifert catches hell because he won one immediately on Bill Walsh's back. And that's not fair because we've seen guys step into a great situation. Look what happened the first year with Barry Switzer when he went to Dallas. I mean, he stepped into a great situation as well.
And sometimes you step into a great one and then you still blow it.
So with Seifert, now if you're looking at this expanded conversation, and one thing that I do feel, and Paul and Kirk, I haven't been doing this in quite the official capacity, I don't think as long as you guys have, it's about like 5 years now, but maybe a little longer, maybe like since 16. But one thing that seems to be going on is a little bit of a sea change in processes and in acceptance and in like widening the concept of, you know, what the criteria is, what's most important, who gets left out for what reasons, or who no longer gets left out for reasons that they previously would have gotten left out at. And I'm wondering, you know, just as I was talking that through and I was talking about Mike Shanahan, 2 as a coach, 1 as an assistant, George Seifert, 2 as a coach, 3 as an assistant, 2 of them as defensive coordinator. So yeah, it does start to feel like, I don't know, Bill Cowher, he gets that one. You don't want to ever say to anybody, gosh, why did you get it? Because you got Bill Cowher, what an incredible coach, what an incredible story. It's not like that. But I do start to wonder, you know, with this big mass of people and this sort of changing mindset, and a little bit, it feels like maybe a little bit more proactive changes and maybe an open-mindedness to maybe we should do it this way, maybe we should vote this many guys in, we'll have a centennial class. It seemed like there have been like a number of significant shifts in how people approach voting and what the structures are and the processes over the past like 3 years. So I wonder if that will start to play a factor as well. Yeah, we're not even talking about Paul, your guy, because you think this is over, right? You think this is Bob Kraft.
I do too.
Yeah, I love him or hate him.
And
I think you look at a guy who finished very close. I think 1 vote away from being the contributor last year. That's how close that was. And I think somebody told me they went through 7 rounds of elimination vote to get to that point. That's how divided and how close that was. And he pops up here again. And it tells me, although it's a different group, right? We've talked about this different voters, he's got to be the odds-on favorite. I mean, as an owner to have that many Super Bowls, the other issues aside, let's not get into that.
Well,
I just don't.
it'll be a happy ending if he gets in.
Yes.
Hey.
Ah,
Paul,
I set you up for that one. I know I did.
thank you.
Paul said they had popped up a few times, and I was just gonna hang back, but you jumped right in with the happy ending, Kirk. So I guess it's open. It's open.
I just think he's such his name just sort of jumps off the page, and I really think that
he's got
voters.
He's got the most titles out of all of them. He pretty much made football, I don't want to say relevant in Boston because it always was, but
I mean,
where the Patriots
so fast.
Yeah, but where the Patriots were, and I guess Paul, you and I can because we're the two elder statesmen here. So I think we remember growing up that. Well, but you didn't really think of the New England Patriots as one of those power teams because they weren't, and they had that fluke AFC title appearance where they got their ass handed to them by your Bears, but there was nothing there for the longest time. And that was in one of the most sports-minded cities in the United States.
Right.
Yeah.
And for me, look
how fast Kraft flipped it. He bought his first season. He bought the team in '93 or '94, and they were in the Super Bowl in '96. I mean, it was just
for me, sometimes he's one of these guys that he's such an obvious contender, right? That I wonder if the voters just look at that and say, elect him because it opens the whole field as we move forward, right? It opens up opportunities for all these other guys we've been talking about because he's clearly deserving. He's at a tier or at the top of the tier. You get him off the table this year.
You get him off.
And there's no other real, I'm not even going to count Modell in this. There's really not a rival owner here. There just isn't. So to your point, Paul, I mean, he stands out of the page for that reason alone too. When we can debate all these coaches, put a pecking order, flip them a million times, and it's not that we'd even have that much of a problem with any of this. What owner are we going to put over Kraft right now? Nobody.
6 rings, 10 Super Bowls, and like I was saying with certain coaches, where you look at them and you say, I can just kind of sense his impact. You can just sense Robert Kraft's impact, the way that he brought in these huge personalities, Parcells, and then Bill Belichick became a much bigger personality, and he was able to still work with him for so long. And the way that he was able to manage, himself and Belichick and Brady, and his commitment to keeping the team relevant year after year and doing what it takes, and having faith in his general manager, because one of the defining characteristics of the Patriots' first 3 Super Bowl titles was shedding popular veterans and productive veterans. I mean, they went through every year. It seemed like 2 of the guys who had made the championship the year before what it was were out the door. I mean, remember when they got rid of Lawyer Malloy? Right before the start of the season, everyone was like, what are you doing? There's a certain amount of faith that goes into, you as an owner saying, all right, I'm going to respect Belichick and Scott Pioli and let them do whatever it is that they're doing, even if it means every year, Branch and Vinatieri and, now McGinnis is gone and Richard Seymour goes to Oakland, and getting rid of all these dudes and then replacing them. And ultimately doing that with Brady as well, which is whatever, bold. But I think you always felt like the way that Kraft was approaching the team was to win and to also get out of people's way. I always look at those ring ceremonies they have where it's every year Robert Kraft is it comes out, has spent the most money of anybody ever on a championship ring. There's a great quote from Steve McMichael in the collection that SI Sports Illustrated, that SI did, where they interviewed one person from every Super Bowl champion on the ring. And McMichael said that he had heard. He was like, it was a nice ring, but I heard that the NFL gives you $4,000, gives every franchise $4,000 to spend on the ring, and then it's up to the team owner to, spend more. He goes, guess how much our ring costs? $4,000. So when I see those ring ceremonies with the Patriots, I feel like that's real. I mean, that's like a real, it's empowering. You feel like, man, this was worth it. And you can feel that impact trickle throughout the entire organization. That's why it's been so difficult to figure out who is going to be some of these Pro Bowlers, some of these Hall of Famers from this Pat's dynasty.
Mhm.
We lost Paul. He's bored by
I'm sure I'll pop back in.
bored by me. That's why it's hard, I think, to figure out some of these Hall of Famers, because that really is a roster that works 1 to 53. So
not only that, though. I mean, look at the owners that didn't advance, which paves it even easier for him. Bud Adams, there's a very strong case for him.
Sure.
Didn't advance. Ralph Hay, pretty much the man who came up with the National Football League, did not advance. Clint Murchison, another who pretty much put Dallas on the map, didn't advance.
Sure.
Those are 3 Hall of Famers, I think. This is paved perfectly for him.
Yeah, and I think that the way that Paul put it is perfect. Put him in, and it opens up the field, and now you're having a lot of other conversations. Listen, my personal feeling for Bob Kraft aside, I mean.
Okay, so let's go to that. Why? What are the issues?
Because he was busted in a sex trafficking ring.
He's enjoying himself. Did he know that they were sex traffickers?
I would go with yes.
All right, well, fine. I don't know.
That's my suspect. I think that people at that level kind of know what they're doing.
If he knew what he was doing, why would he be doing that there?
Well, anyways, that and the personal politics means that I'm not really a Bob Kraft fan. But gosh, even I got to look at what he did, and I'm saying, like, his commitment to that organization, to winning, I just feel like it permeates through everything that they did. Mm-hmm. He has 6 rings. His franchise value has gone through the roof since he bought it. However many times, X. I wouldn't even know. I'd have to look it up. It's massive. They were a mess. They had, they were like the joke of the NFL in 89, 90, 91. I mean, they were nothing. I remember Marv Cook in 94 signed with the Bears. We won our week 1 game against, I think, Tampa. I think it was like 21-6, something like that. And I remember Marv Cook being like, feels good to win one. Can't believe I'm here instead of with the sorry Patriots. This isn't the feeling I got with the Patriots. Marv Cook was a good tight end. He's a Pro Bowler, all pro. And he was just like, ugh, thank God. I mean, that's what Bob Kraft bought, and that's what he flipped.
We've got also, too, some other names we can just go pretty quick who didn't advance. Lots of scouts. So, which again, I don't know if maybe we should get like a scouting thing, because when Bill Nunn got in, that was very shocking. Not because he doesn't deserve it, he does, but just that they would actually get to a scout. Because they generally.
Yeah, I mean, that one. He and gosh, what a scout he had to be.
Sure, absolutely, but still, yeah, it's a hard road.
Totally.
Yeah. So we've got C.O. Mercado, Otho Davis, who did not advance. Let's move on here a little further. Eddie Cotel, another scout. Rich McKay, has got a very good resume too. John McVay, Carl Peterson, Lee Remmel, Marty Schottenheimer.
Yeah.
Jerry Seaman, Seymour Siloff, who was again part of that 2020 group. Amy Trask, Jim Tunney, Jack Venisi, and Lloyd Wells.
Yeah, I mean, everybody, look up the resumes if you're interested on all these people. It's a lot of hitters. People have their difference of opinion about this one or that one, but overall pretty good group. By the way, Paul chatted, his laptop died. He's done for the night, and he had a good time. He wishes us the best.
Right.
Yeah, it's still a weird. This is still a place where I would want to see changes made to categories. I mean, a couple of years ago when I did that ballot in 2019, Clark Shaughnessy was in the modern era category. He was just like a modern era guy for no good reason, only because he couldn't be a senior, I guess, because he wasn't a player. So, but then he wasn't a coach, so they just slapped him in there. It was bizarre. Now you've got someone like, how do you compare Mike Shanahan to Ralph Hay? How do you compare Dan Reeves to Bob Kraft? How do you compare a scout to a ref? I mean, some of this feels like it needs to be separated even further.
And maybe they will. I mean, they are going in the right direction. That we're at least getting more, but it's. I mean, we aren't that far removed from when they would just sort of like put a nominee up and then, okay, well, it looks like they're a lock, and then they say no. Like that's happened before when they would put up a senior candidate.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's funny, when I was making the list of all of the seniors, as you got 81 guys who are all decade between the 20s and the 90s who aren't yet in. And then you have like 10 MVPs on top of that. You've got offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year. You've got that historian draft that we looked at. I think they drafted 35 players. I think 24 of them were not in that, were not among those 81 all-decade guys. And then you had guys like Sterling Sharp and Steve Tasker. But, one category of seniors who I didn't even look at are guys who were nominated, who were a finalist, but then who got voted down and then didn't pop back up. So like Beatty Feathers from the Bears one year was like the senior finalist. And he got voted down, and that's it. Like he's not in the hall, and there's just so many. So I would at least I would like to see coaches get separated out. And I just also feel, I don't go quite as far into caring about scouts or refs or even to some degree media, even though I'm a journalist, but I would like some way to honor kind of career assistants. So, Richie Pettibone or Sherman Lewis or Fritz Shermer, or I'm sure there's a gajillion guys who, had this incredible assistant career, Wade Phillips. And they're never going to get
we're a few years away from that.
Maybe we're a few years away, yeah.
All right, so now we talk about those who died. Evan does this far better than I do. He's got that whole sympathy thing, and he's got that in memoriam voice. I don't have that, so just bear with me as I'm going to tell you who died in the last week. I don't have any like somber music. Maybe I should. That'd be good. At the age of 102, Italian Olympic skier Selina Segui died. 1948, 1952 in the Olympics. Pretty impressive. At 76, College Football Hall of Famer and Kansas City Chiefs Hall of Famer Jim Lynch passed away. We should do like suicide as
Keep going. Keep reading it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. At 58, Dwight Smith, outfielder, 89 to 96. Cubs, Angels, Orioles, second rookie of the year voting behind your guy, Jerome Walt. World Series winner with the Braves. Johnny Egan, 10-year vet of the NBA. Played in the 60s with Detroit, New York, Baltimore, the Lakers, Cleveland, San Diego. Didn't win a title, but two-time finalist. Here's one I found really interesting. At age 68, I'm probably saying this wrong, Vin Remmersval only had 58 innings pitched, all with the Red Sox. But the second Dutch-born player behind Bert Blyleven, but the first European player, like pure European. He was trained in Major League Baseball. Apparently, I didn't even know this existed. He won gold in 1973 European Baseball Championship. Did you know that existed?
I didn't know that existed.
I did not know that. The Dutch have won 24. Italy have won 10. I wonder how many of those people on Team Italy actually are from Italy. Probably not very many, based on the World Baseball Classic.
These are important questions.
That and who invented liquid soap and why? What was wrong with regular soap? I don't know. I ask these things.
But we have both in the house, and depending on which sink I'm at, I get bar, I get liquid. I feel like I prefer a bar for like hand soap, but maybe liquid for the shower.
It depends I guess if I'm in an airport, liquid is the way to go.
Well, then you want liquid. Well, obviously, are there bar soaps in there? What kind of scuzzy? I've been in some bad airports, bro, and they did not have. None of them had bar soap.
Amazingly, air travel's been going around for 100 years, but it took until the 80s before everyone said, "Hey, let's put wheels on these suitcases."
Yeah. They should have got their act together.
Yeah, put a man on the moon, but wheel on a suitcase. No. Anyway, Bob Heathcote, bass player for Suicidal Tendencies, died at 58, car crash. Yeah. David Warner, British actor, best known for playing Jack the Ripper in, I remember this film, Time After Time, with Anthony Hopkins. So, what a bunch of other shit. And I guess the biggest name that we lost, like just a month after, is Paul Sorvino.
Yeah, the mob hits out of control.
It is, yeah.
The god mob hits.
Yeah, there's probably a lot more. Evan usually just comes up with all these people that I don't know where he comes up with it, but again,
a lot. No, but bro, a lot of people die. Like it's
do?
all the time.
He'll come up with ones that's like, where are you coming up with that?
Were you guys doing this show in 2020?
Yes.
The year that I feel like it was an entire proper lineup of dead MLB Hall of Famers, or at least perennial all-stars. There was an entire Hall of Fame defensive backfield.
There are times where it's like
5 Hall of Fame basketball coaches. That was a weird one.
Yeah. Well, COVID didn't help a lot with that either.
But I don't think those were any of those famous older athlete COVID deaths? No, I don't know.
You never know.
Yeah, but that was an unruly year of losing people in sports. That was the Kobe year. Obviously, it started with David Stern on January 1st. That was weird. 2020. Who needs it?
Not me. I'm very happy in 2022.
Interception Cowboys. I think the Cowboys are going to win the Super Bowl. I'm sure that
you're going to lay some money on that.
I'm sure that everything will be fine for them.
Okay. I could do a wager on that one if you want. So I got another section. I call it elevator up, elevator down, where I look at what happened in the last week, who made a better Hall of Fame case. And I kind of envision it like Debo. He runs sort of like that velvet rope, right? You're not going to get into the Hall unless Debo sort of like gives you that A-okay. So there's not a lot of things going on in sports. And actually, we just sort of like talked about all these people who obviously are elevator ups because they just became finalists. Right. Saying that, in the world of hockey, I've got a few things here. You and I have never talked hockey, so I don't know how big a hockey fan you are.
I'm not a big hockey guy.
You're not a big hockey fan. All right, so I'll be doing the heavy lifting on this one then.
Yeah, I grew up in the time when the Wirtz family blacked out the home games.
Oh.
On TV.
Really?
Yeah, and additionally, I grew up in the MJ years, and the Pippen years, and the championship years for the Bulls. And you really only have like enough attention span for like one. I think there's no one in Chicago who's equally a Hawks or a Bulls fan. You're kind of like a basketball family or a hockey family. We were more a basketball, or I was more a basketball family. So I didn't spend that much time.
Blackhawks were garbage throughout the 90s. So.
Well, we went to the Cup in '92. And then we started to.
Was it 92?
Yeah, against Pittsburgh.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just Pittsburgh was so good.
Yeah, we lost, but that was, we ended up in sudden death with Van Dam. That movie's dope.
And you said you're not a hockey person. Well, the Calgary Flames, 2 provinces over, they lost their 2 best players. Now, one by trade, and they're both my elevator ups because now let's see what they're really made of. Because we've got Johnny Hockey, Johnny Gaudreau, who bolted in a big shocking move for Columbus. This is now his team. What's he gonna do?
What is he gonna do?
I don't know. But this is, it'll be interesting, and it's also when we talk about biases. Vinny Losmanuso, our friend, he's got his own show where he tells us about interesting Hall of Fame cases, and he came on and talked about Frank Zamboni. If you don't know who Frank Zamboni is, well, what do you think he invented? The Zamboni.
That was good. Yeah, that was gonna be my guess.
Yeah. Well, Frank's not in the Hockey Hall of Fame, but he is in the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame, the Ice Skating Hall of Fame, the Speed Skate, like all sorts of halls of fame, as he should be. And I argued that if he was Canadian, he'd probably already be in. Because the committee that decides all of this, the 16-person committee, is predominantly all Canadian. Is there an unconscious bias? Probably.
Or a conscious bias.
Or it could be. Yeah. I mean, I don't see how it's not there. I don't see how someone like that has never been on a radar once.
Yeah, made the whole Zamboni. They named it after him.
Yeah. I mean, without him, like, what do you...
That's the sort of thing I don't care about, though. Like, I want the history of it. I want to display in whatever the Hall of Fame is that tells you the history. But in terms of saying, like, this person's a Hall of Famer, for me personally, as a sports fan, I start to lose interest the further away you get from the field of play or, on the ice. The further you get away from the actual team. Again, even with media, like we have reporter and media halls of fame. That feels like enough. Few are the sports reporters that I feel like they impacted a sport to such a degree that they should be getting in the Hall of Fame with players.
No, and I agree with you. But when we talked about that, it made me think about the whole Canada USA thing.
Yeah.
So Johnny is an American. So in theory, I could say, well, maybe this is an elevator down. But his profile's never been bigger. And that can only help. Same with Matthew Tkachuk, who is now a Florida Panther.
Is he related to Keith Tkachuk?
Yes.
Is that his son?
Yes, it is.
See, I'm a generation behind in knowing about hockey players, other than obviously in Chicago.
So that's another great American player, and who Calgary is one of those teams. Like I thought they had a shot to win it all. They didn't. Now they're kind of decimated. And when you're a Canadian hockey team, you pretty much you've got your windows and they close pretty quick. Because great players don't want to play up here. They just don't.
Interesting.
What
about great Canadian players?
No. Generally, they don't. Mainly because, if you grew up in Winnipeg, where I am now, where do you want to be? In Winnipeg? Do you want to live in Winnipeg or do you want to live in Phoenix?
Sure.
So, there's a bit of that. Also, you're making good money. You're not necessarily in that public eye as much. Hockey players are not as big attention seekers as basketball players. They're just not. I don't know why, but they're not. So if you're a Canadian player and you have a shit game, especially in Toronto, that's all you're going to hear about in sports radio. Now, if you're doing that in Tampa, even though they've been to 3 straight finals, it's not the same.
No, right.
The pressure's just not there. It just isn't. It takes a special type of mindset to want to sort of do that in a Canadian-based team.
Right, because Canadians also it's more crucial to the Canadian identity.
I remember the Toronto Sun when I was a kid. It was 4 pages dedicated, including the front page, because Canada in a world championship tied Italy. And that's all they could talk about.
Right. It's tied to the national identity. The same reason that when the U.S. men's team finished sixth in the '02 FIBA games and then won the bronze in '04 in the Olympics, it was an existential threat to American life. All of a sudden, we're not the best basketball team in the world, even though the women, of course, were winning gold. But when the men dipped down and they had to rebuild everything starting in '06 and be like, we're taking this, 3-year commitment, '06, '07, we had the qualifying tournament, and then '08. And the idea that all these, everybody had to buy in, you had to get back to the basics of USA basketball. And of course, then we went on this huge winning streak and, won in '08, 10, 12, 14, 16. And then we had, I think,
the one in 21.
And then one in 21. Yeah, we won every Olympics since the men and the women, I think.
Right, but I don't think it's the same. And the reason I'll say that, let's look at the 2021. You could have put together the second best team internationally could have been made up of 12 other American players that didn't play.
On paper, but that's not what we see.
But it could happen. And same with international, right? Because there's a lot of great players internationally who do not, like Ben Simmons didn't play for Australia, and there's Giannis, I don't think was even in the qualifying because Greece didn't make it, but he didn't play in the qualifiers either. In hockey, that's not the mindset. The best players play, period, for all countries. There's not the owners don't want them to, but they do.
Mm-hmm.
There's not going to be a case where any Canadian or American or Swede or Finnish player or Russian, they all want to play.
Well, absolutely, but how big is a Canadian international team hockey roster?
Well, the hockey, they'll send 25 players.
Same number as normal, 25.
Yeah.
All right, so you're looking at 25 players versus 12 for a basketball team. You're definitely going to have a wider overflow of elite players who aren't going to the Olympics, who aren't going to the FIBA games.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just saying that no elite player, like the hockey version of LeBron James, does not say, I don't want to play. It doesn't happen.
No, but that's what's changed with the U.S. men's team, is that we finally had a team. That was what was becoming the difference between the U.S. and these other programs, was that the teams that we were losing to in like '04, for example. So in '06 in Japan, the FIBA games. This is the first run of like the new generation: LeBron, Melo, Wade, Chris Bosh, Dwight Howard, on and on. Coach K, Jerry Colangelo, and we only lost one game, which is the wrong game because it was in a medal round, and we lost to Greece. And people were like, Greece doesn't have any. That's funny now, but they were like, Greece doesn't have any NBA players, right?
Yeah.
And that was irrelevant. What mattered was that team, I think like their top 6 players had all been on the Greece national team for a decade. There were guys who went back to like not the '92 Olympics, but some kind of international competition in '93 and '94. That's how long those guys had been together and learning that system. And that's what the U.S. changed. That's what Colangelo and Coach K and LeBron and Carmelo Anthony, who's to me like a great American Olympian. And I know that people don't think of basketball players in that way because it's not an individual sport, and it's a sport that is obviously so dominated by what happens throughout the year in the NBA. But to me, Carmelo Anthony embraced the way that maybe Canadian hockey players do, embrace this idea of like American basketball is important, and it does matter who goes, even though we know that you could send this 12, you could send this 12, you could send this 12, and you could figure it out and do all right. And what that team said was, it matters who goes, and we all have to be there. And they created, for the first time ever, a real sustained program, a real, this is Team USA. And it's not just because we showed up for one Olympics, it's because we, show up repeatedly every 2 years. And then, they brought Durant in, in 2010 in those FIBA games. He was the star of that in Turkey, and then he came over and was the lead scorer for Team USA in London in 2012. He's been the leading scorer, I think, in each of the gold medal games that he's been in. And then he bailed us out in 2021. So that to me is the big difference. And that's that American basketball identity, just as there's a Canadian hockey identity, which speaks to what you're saying. You know, listen, if Canada was warmer than America, then maybe American basketball players would want to just play for the Raptors.
No, it's that's the great thing about sort of shifting, demographics. So, like 2 of the top 10 players drafted were Canadian in the NBA draft. Unheard of 20 years ago. That would never have happened.
Right.
And Canada is now breeding a lot of phenomenal basketball players. It's something that you would just sort of like never.
100%.
Yeah. But
100%. No, it has totally changed.
Yeah. But anywho, so with that, it's time to just sort of like plug everything. So before I plug all my shit, Jack, where can everyone sort of follow all your stuff? And they should. You're a thread on why Steve Mongo McMichael should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame is legendary, in my opinion.
Oh, I appreciate that. And Kirk is so much fun. And obviously I love our crew talks. It was fun to just have just a little more isolated, just the 3 of us. It was really cool. Yeah. And I feel like also like you could take like almost any 3 people in our group that you've assembled, and I would have really enjoyed it. You know, like it's really cool. I appreciate you for putting this together. Yeah, everybody can check me at ReadJack, ReadJack on Twitter, and I'm working on a book on the 1990s Bulls dynasty. It will be the first book that is actually about the dynasty on a whole, as opposed to books on individual seasons or biographies of individual players. This is the first book that takes the Bulls dynasty in terms of what happened on the court and the social impact, what it felt like to be in Chicago or in the suburbs, what it felt like to be in the US and even global. And you can follow all my interviews and all my research at readjack.substack.com. There's a lot of good free stuff. And if you want to buy a subscription, as I always say, it is packs in a month and pip in a year. If you get what I'm saying, then this one's for you.
Love it. Well, now I'm going to plug my shit. Hey, I wrote a book.
You got shit.
I got shit. Yeah. Chavo Guerrero, instant classic. I helped the late, great Chavo Guerrero Sr. write his autobiography before he passed away. You can get that on Amazon. Chavo Guerrero, instant classic. Soon to be on, I don't know, what do you call it? Kindle. I don't know what that is. I got to get someone to do that for me because I don't know. Damn it.
And I think
also, the classic sports review is coming back. I've landed a couple of special guests for that, and we're going to be looking at the Detroit Red Wings Colorado Avalanche bloodbath. So look for that coming up soon. Every week, there's also Vinny, well, not every week, but Vinny Lospinuso makes his Hall of Fame cases, and it's always very interesting. And they might be obscure, but I'm always entertained. So
there you go. And you gotta plug Paul.
Absolutely. Paul, who was here with us, you can follow him at PFHOF
Canton Guy.
Canton Guy. Okay, yes, Paul Lawrence. And as you saw, just a great guy, really knows his shit, and just always a good time when he's around. Also, too, definitely. Once a week, I look at bad songs that went #1. So we just recorded Mbop. Remember that one?
Of course. Yeah.
I look at how the hell they went #1.
I mean, it's catchy as hell. And you had, people like the Brothers, they like family bands. There was also the sense that the youngest boy people thought was a girl, and there was some publicity. What's that?
The middle one.
The middle one?
Yeah.
The middle one they thought was a girl? Well, there was some kind of, I think, publicity there as well, when it was like, you don't know that actually all the Hansons, those are all boys, those are all brothers. There was like another element to it that you could get into. It's just a catchy song. I mean, it's a dumb song, but it's a good little song.
Well, now no one has to listen to it because you summed it all up. But yes, that's pretty much what we do.
Just be glad I didn't sing that during your in memoriam segment.
Yeah, we could have done. Could have
They've
that.
done it.
And also, we're going to shoot another episode. This crap was on national television, where we look at the Harlem Globetrotters visit Gilligan's Island.
I didn't know that happened.
Well, yes, not a lot of people did, and they should have. Maybe that's best left forgotten.
Wow.
But
Well,
with that, wherever you
let's see.
are, wherever you may be, stay safe, everybody.